Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Webdelics podcast, where we're on a journey to find out the truth about plant medicine, get rid of the myths, and change the narrative. I'm your host, Scott Mason, and with us today is Owen Fitzpatrick. Owen is a social psychologist originally from Ireland, although he's traveled over 100 countries, and he has education credentials including Harvard and MIT here in the United States. He focuses on applying psychology and neuroscience to help leaders and organizations do better. He's also a TEDx and international speaker and author of 9 books with another on the way. Owen, do something with your life. You need to learn how to work.
I know, Scott. It's terrible. I really need to put my head down and start focusing.
I am so unimpressed. In any event, that book is going to have a chapter on psychedelics, and that chapter and that book is why Owen is with us today. Owen, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Scott. It's great to be on Webdelics. I'm a big fan of the show, and I'm very excited to be chatting with you today.
We are excited too. Now, I'm going to frame this conversation a little bit to start off with. As we have talked to people who have gone on psychedelic journeys throughout the course of this show, something that has come up again and again and again has been the extremely transformational nature of those psychedelic experiences, as often as not described in profoundly spiritual terms. And it raises the question that is at the center of our discussion today. What is the relationship between the spiritual nature of those experiences and the religious belief systems that hundreds of millions of people have as their foundations right now and every day? In other words, what does the psychedelic renaissance mean for those who are people of faith? And perhaps as importantly, what does it mean for those who are not people of faith? Now, one of the things that we wanted to, in our pre-show, make sure that we got out to folks right at the beginning and reinforce this or add on whatever you want to, Owen, as we move forward. But during this discussion, we are not here to stake a claim as to whether any particular religious belief system is true or not, or whether the absence of a religious belief system is true or not. In other words, whether what you as the audience member believes is the truth isn't what we're talking about. We're talking about the nature of the psychedelic experience and belief. Hearing all of that, Owen, is there anything that you want to add right up front?
Yes, Scott. I mean, I think straight away, when we talk about something along the lines of the experience you have when you engage in psychedelics, what we have to remember is that psychedelics fundamentally alter what's going on in our brain. And as a result of that, we go into altered state. And as a result of those altered states, we can have a spiritual experience to that. But it also has a biological experience that we're going through at the same time. And I think whenever we talk about psychedelics, if we just talk about it from the spiritual realm, we're locking ourselves inside of one way of looking at psychedelics. And I think given the incredible advantage that they can potentially offer us in the field of psychology, I think it's imperative that we look at psychedelics from multiple lenses. My area of focus, and I'm a nerd. I'm not one of those cool nerds that can hack into the Pentagon and build a network worth like billions, but I'm a nerd in that I'm obsessed with regards to people and why we believe what we believe. And in the journey, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, but in the journey that I've been on, I've had some exposure to psychedelics, and I also am very aware of the science. When I was working in the book that I'm writing currently, when I was working on the chapter with regards to psychedelics of different nature and how they impact the beliefs that we have, part of that is, of course, the spiritual beliefs. But it's not just that. It's our entire way of constructing the world, the stories we tell ourselves. And so I think it's important that we don't get lost in this notion of, this is all about spirituality, and because people have spiritual experiences, psychedelics is a spiritual experience. It is, but it's so much more than that as well. And I think it's imperative we look at it holistically in order for us to truly understand the power and the impact that it can have. Every single Webdelic show, you're sharing lots of different experts talking about different sides. it's important and imperative, I think, to do justice to the real power of this, that we're able to look at it not just from a spiritual experience, but also from a biological experience and also from a psychological and cultural experience as well. So I would just add that in from a context perspective.
I love it. And your ability to speak so multidimensionally about the psychedelics experience with regards to the very specific subject matter that we are talking about today is why Webdelics has been so excited about having you on the show, Owen, and why this conversation is going to be rich. Now, that being said, I've got to go off on a little bit of a tangent here. I always tell the audience, I'm going to keep it real, and my guests have to tell the truth. So you told a little bit of a lie there. You said you were not a cool nerd. You are a cool nerd. I have to correct that. Owen, come on.
I appreciate that, Scott. Thank you. If one person thinks I'm a cool nerd, then I'm good with that.
We just need one fan in our lives. That's all. Now, let's talk about the cool stuff that you focus on. And I don't care what you think it is actually really cool. What exactly, and I want to get into this question because I think it's important to have a common foundational knowledge about what we're talking about and an understanding between you, me, and the audience as the conversation deepens. When we talk about belief, that's one of those words that everyone throws around. As I was prepping for this show, though, I have to admit, I never really thought in depth about what that word even means. And so perhaps you could give some insight about it.
Sure.
What we're talking about.
So again, as you pointed out, Scott, belief has a lot of different types of definitions. The way I like to understand a belief is an idea you feel certain about. And a lot of times we talk about beliefs and thoughts as if they're the same thing, but you can think a lot of things. It doesn't necessarily mean you believe them. And in many ways, whatever you believe in, you give power to. And so for me, I'm not that interested in what other people are thinking because we can think a million thoughts. I'm interested in what we believe. As part of a TEDx talk that I did, I spoke for about 10 minutes or so in rhyme, and it was all about mind control. It was about the two voices, the way in which we talk to ourselves. And in that, there's a line that I say, whereas when you're depressed, you don't think negatively. When you're depressed, you believe negatively.
Wow.
And that's an important distinction to help us understand a little bit more about what a belief is. A belief is an idea you feel certain about. When you're depressed, you're in a different state. It's a little bit like when you're on a trip, when you take, you ingest some ayahuasca or you take some LSD or some mushroom, psilocybin, whatnot. You go into a certain state, and when you're experiencing depression, which is something I experienced when I was much younger, and I've gone through, and I have to be, I suppose, vigilant against, that is a very powerful state. And in that state, you're not thinking negatively. It's not like you go, oh, what if this goes wrong? You're convinced that things will go wrong. You're convinced that your life has no meaning. You're believing this. You're not thinking it, you're believing it. And so with belief, it's an idea you feel certain about. And that's the missing piece there, is that there's an emotional component to a belief, right? And we need to be able to look at that. The neuroscience out there shows that whenever we talk about beliefs, a lot of the times when we discuss them, we're actually talking about a feeling we have of certainty. And that feeling of certainty is what differentiates that belief from a lot of the other ideas or thoughts that go inside our mind. And once we understand that, we then have to look at, well, how do beliefs change? Why do we believe what we believe? Why do some thoughts end up in a belief? Why do some people believe in certain conspiracy theories? Why do some people believe in political views on the left and others believe in political views on the right? Why do some people believe in one religion and someone doesn't believe in religion at all? I'm fascinated with the answers to those questions. And in the work that I've done, the speculation most of us have before I did research, at least I had it, which was that we rationalize. So what happens is we go and we take in the evidence, and then we go through our rational brains,
Right.
and intellectually we come up with a conclusion. Well, actually, nothing could be further from the truth. It doesn't work that way. We do not generate beliefs based upon logically extrapolating from whatever we see in the world. In fact, we are the victims, let's just say, just for a term, of a very, very quick operating system of our brain where we jump to conclusions. And then our brain, like a lawyer, goes to work to actually justify the beliefs we extract. So it's important to get that right from the get-go, is that number one, we have a lot of belief systems about the way the world works, about ourselves, about our jobs, about what's good and what's bad. Values are beliefs about what's important to us, right? So we have a whole set. Our identity is our beliefs about who we are. We've all of these beliefs, and some of them are true, as in their knowledge, they can be verified.
Right.
Some of them are not. Some of them are empowering and help us. Some of them don't. Some of them limit us and cause us a massive amount of grief. And it's really important that we start to learn and understand our beliefs a lot more so that we can start to change those beliefs. Because if we can change our beliefs, we'll change our behavior, and we'll change our behavior long term. Because ideas don't lead to change. It's your belief in an idea that leads to change. Because when you believe in something, you commit to it. When you believe in yourself, that power allows you to do so much more. So what I try to do is work with leaders, work with executives, and work with people, individuals of all walks of life, helping them to be able to cultivate the power of belief, which is, again, including obviously the logical, but also an emotional component to it. So that's a big, long-winded answer, but hopefully it gives you some clarity as to at least how I approach beliefs.
Thank you for that. I think that detailed set of statements provides clarity. And it was needed because this is a complex topic, a lot more complex than I realized even before you started talking. Now, I'm going to step back into the conversation a little bit and address a few things that you touched on that I think are highly consequential. First, your discussion about depression as an altered mental state. Actually, Owen, that was pretty profound. And it's a little bit show-stopping, at least for me, because as someone who is entering into the world of psychedelics, my big fear about it has always been related to the fact that it is altering my mental state. Now, that also is what excites me about it. But it creates this sense of alienness about it, perhaps because the altered state is due to something allegedly foreign entering into the body, something we ingest or whatever. That being said, thinking about modalities like depression as themselves altered mental states that may or may not be comparable, at least in kind, to what a psychedelic experience might be, actually reframes both depression and the psychedelic experience. It makes it a lot less alien and scary to me. But am I perhaps overreaching here, or what's your reaction hearing me say all this back at you?
I think the first thing is to realize that depression is not the only, sort of, let's just call it, for want of a better expression, hypnotic state that we enter into.
Right.
Right. It's one of many. When we're very severely anxious, again, we're in a state of anxiety. And inside of that state, we're convinced that everything is going to be scary and things aren't going to work out the way we want it to. Now, when you talk about your beliefs or your expectations about the psychedelic experience, a large part of those beliefs will actually, and has been shown, will influence the experience that you have. Whatever your beliefs are, whenever you ingest something, and this could even be alcohol. There's been a lot of research out there with the placebo effect, where even from an alcohol perspective, when people believe that they're drinking alcohol, they start to feel drunk. And even they've shown that people will tend to have a hangover when they believe they've drunk alcohol, even when they haven't. So all forms of drugs, they do have an influence, of course, but they're also susceptible to the beliefs that we have about the drug itself. And so the beliefs you have about psychedelics, that they change your mental state, well, you could also argue that you go from mental state to mental state every single day. Now, obviously, this is a very different mental state, but whenever you go asleep, your dream is just as crazy and just as weird. Your dreaming state is just as crazy and just as weird as any psychedelic experience you could have. If you talk to shaman that specialize in this and that have ayahuasca ceremonies every single week, or engage in peyote, or whatever it is that they do, they will actually tell you that these sort of chemicals that we put in, they won't even call them chemicals. They'll say that this medicine is part of the natural environment. So when we say, I'm putting something foreign into my body, for them, from their point of view, we are the universe. Once you
Mhm.
experience a psychedelic journey, you start to see how you are not as individual as you think, and you're part of the universe. And so when you take something that comes from the natural earth,
Right.
then you are partaking in something that is very, very natural. So it doesn't feel like a foreign body. And so it's important to recognize that we can have a million different beliefs about this experience. What matters the most to me is what are the potential benefits of psychedelics in helping us with the states that we're in? How can psychedelics help us to change beliefs? That's the question I've been asking. How can psychedelics help us with regards to therapy? And I think there's a massive amount of research coming out there. I know Webdelics, references that quite a lot. You've
Yeah.
got wonderful experts on. And so to me, there's a huge potential. I think this is the next frontier in psychology. And from my own experience with ayahuasca a number of years ago and with mushrooms a number of years ago, I got to experience it firsthand, what it's like to be in a very, very different state. And it seems a lot more dramatic than most of the other states that you're in.
Mm-hmm.
But if my entire world is different when I'm depressed, and my entire world is different when I'm experiencing ayahuasca, what's the difference there? Just because one's a bit more all over the place or crazy, or one's a little bit more demure and I'm not moving much, just because one seems to be incorporating some, let's say, inverted commas, hallucinations, and the other is, struggling in a different way. Both of them have delusions. When I'm
Wow.
depressed, I believe a whole bunch of things that aren't true. And when I'm experiencing ayahuasca, I believe a whole bunch of things that aren't true. But the difference is one of them allows us to have more flexibility. One of them is good for what we call neuroplasticity, which we can get into.
Mhm.
And that's, the psychedelics. Depression itself is really a state whereby you're reinforcing the same old negative thoughts, the same old negative beliefs over and over again, and you're seeing everything through that filter. And so, to me, that's one differentiation that we need to look at. But I certainly think that if that model of looking at depression as a state and psychedelics as a state helps you to be able to look at it more kindly, well, then I think it's a useful model.
But you've also pointed out something that I hadn't thought about before until now. And I'm actually trigger something I'm going to share with you in the audience that I've never actually shared on any show before about my own life that it relates to. On 9/11, I was not that far away from the World Trade Center. And I'll never forget the following moment. I was with two friends that I worked with. We were looking at the towers burning. And then all of a sudden, there was this thunderous noise and the earth shook a little bit. And I started to hear people scream. And the building I worked in was about, I don't know, maybe 25 stories tall. Suddenly, a cloud of smoke was coming at us, a dust cloud from the World Trade Center. And I'll never forget seeing the top of it beginning to topple down. It was coming at us. And suddenly, Owen, I wasn't Scott Mason anymore. I was a narrow pinpoint of vision running. And I was nothing more than a flight instinct. I'll never forget my field of vision narrowed down to a small circle right in front of me. It was a profoundly altered state that existed, I surmise, for survival reasons. I needed to have an extraordinarily small range, bandwidth, or a very tiny level of neuroplasticity in order to deal with the belief system I had that I was about to die. Opening up a belief system, having an experience that allows the tightening of the mind that we might not even realize we have every day to expand, is something that I would think could have then profound implications for how we operate in the world. But I want you to comment on that if you could. But before I do that, I do have to ask quickly, how does a thought become a belief?
So to answer that question and also to comment on your experience, if you think about how we evolved, think about the function. Why do we bother having beliefs at all? Well, the one of the core reasons, there's a multitude of reasons, but one of the core reasons why we have beliefs at all is because in order for us to survive, Scott, we need to get into the place where we make decisions. And in order to make decisions, we have to have a sense of certainty as to the best approach. If you're thinking, maybe I should run, maybe I should stay here, maybe I should just relax, maybe this is no big deal, maybe if you've got too many thoughts, you can't make a decision. You need to have some sense of certainty. So we evolved very early on when we were being chased by the lions or the tigers. We learned very early on to be able to form knowledge, to be able to learn from our experiences. And so the issue is that when we learn knowledge and we develop a belief, it's very similar in terms of what happens in the brain. Because what we do is we get convinced about a particular theory or idea. And that conviction then allows us that when we're in a situation and you see something going on, that belief comes into you going, I'm in danger. There is not a thought there. There's a belief. I'm in danger. Ergo, the chemicals are released into you very, very quickly and you run. You very quickly, without even consciously observing your belief, what happens is your adrenals kick in, adrenaline or epinephrine pumps through your system, cortisol pumps through your system. And what happens is, like in all situations, there's a narrowing focus of vision. Why? Well, again, back in the hunter-gatherer days, in order for us to be able to tackle things, we needed to be able to focus. We needed, on the one hand, the ability to have peripheral vision, to pay attention to what's going on. But whenever we were in real danger, we needed to focus. We needed to pay attention. And we needed to be really good at that. So when you found yourself tunneling up, that's the response of your body with a massive amount of adrenaline. But the reason that kicked off in the first place is because you were convinced of this. So how does a thought turn into a belief? Well, the thought becomes a belief because we need to be able to figure out the answer to the question, what do I need to do next? Our brains, Scott, our brains are prediction machines. They're not designed to make us happy. They're not designed to make us confident. They're not designed to make us smart. They're not designed to make us relaxed. They're designed to help us survive. And in order to survive, our brain makes predictions. What happens is your brain takes information in through your body. Says, what's happening in my body now? Your brain takes information in from the outside world. What's happening in the world now? And then your brain takes information in from the concepts and the memories you have stored from the past. Not very accurate memories, albeit, but still goes into those memories. So out of those three sources, your body, which is a process known as interoception, the world, which is exteroception, or noticing what's going on in your senses, and your memories, your body, your brain then figures out, what do I do next? What do I need to feel? And what do I need to do? And so in that moment, as it decides what's going on, it cultivates a belief, a concept, an idea. This is what's happening now, Scott. So you're standing there, your heart's already beating quite fast because of what's going on, and then this cloud is moving towards you, and immediately your brain is like, we're in danger. Instantly, cortisol and adrenaline pump through your system, and your brain is giving your body what it thinks it needs in order for you to survive. And that comes from the belief that prediction that it's made that it has to buy into. It guesses, it puts a bet on something, and as a result of that, it starts to believe it. And then if it's proven correct, or as long as it's not proven incorrect, it keeps that belief moving forward. Now, in the situation that you found yourself in, Scott, as I mentioned, you went into the tunnel focus system. But it's not just the belief you had that saved you, or at least started the process that saved you. It's also the beliefs that you have after the event as well. And when we experience PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, or the flip side, post-traumatic growth, a large part of whether or not we experience PTG, post-traumatic growth, where the traumatic experience helps us to grow and improve and develop, versus whether we experience post-traumatic stress, largely depends on how we interpret the experience in the immediate aftermath. So if you experience that and you see the experience of adrenaline, which makes you more likely to remember what happened just before it, if you see that as something that helps you to grow and develop, if you can, in that moment, align yourself to that experience and transform the way you interpret it, then that can impact how you think about that experience for the rest of your life, and indeed how you think about yourself, because it's in those big defining moments that we try to learn about ourselves, because you know it's hard for people to forget a moment like that because it was so intense. And so I think it's really vital to understand that our beliefs are not just helping us to survive, but they're also interpreting everything as we go along. Because once again, the brain is trying to figure out what's going to happen next. And in order to do that, it tries to understand the world, understand ourselves, understand the dangers, and to do that, it cultivates a belief system about the world so we can function effectively and stay alive in it.
So are you saying then that psychedelics have somehow in their processing within the body the ability then to shift the narrative or the interpretation of the beliefs that we develop afterwards? Are you saying that they are able to shift how we're perceiving the events around us? Both? Something else altogether? And what does all of that mean?
So psychedelics, what we know so far in terms of how psychedelics work in the brain is we know that one of the things that they do is that there's a natural state of mind, which we call the default mode network, which is whenever we're not doing anything, whenever we're not engaging in a task, whenever we're not focused on something, our brains naturally wander. And a lot of times when they wander, we wander into anxiety, we wander into depressing thoughts. And the reason why we tend to do that is because in that default state where our brain just naturally wanders, we tend to be thinking about ourselves. We tend to be thinking about our relationships with others, our status, right? How important we are, how good we are, how our relationships are going, how our job is going. So we start to think about that. And it's very easy for us to fall into a negative state when we go through that situation. The more you think about yourself and evaluate yourself, the more likely you are to feel bad about yourself.
Don't remind me about that.
But it's interesting that some of the research suggests that most people tend to feel bad on their birthday. And a large part of the reason is because when you're on your birthday, you start to think to yourself, now I'm whatever age you are. And then you compare yourself to other people that are the same age as you. And we can always, now social media, you can find people that are happier than you, better looking than you, more successful than you, like everything. Everyone's on vacation.
Story of my life.
Yes. Everyone's killing it except for you. And so it's really easy for us to be able to do that. So this default mode network they found is a good thing in some ways, because mind wandering itself can be useful from creativity point of view and whatnot, but it often leads us down a wrong track. And it's almost like it's like a buggy, like a bug in the system in terms of, let's say, operating software, for instance. When people experience ayahuasca or psilocybin or DMT or whatever it is, what they found is that they expected the brain would light up a lot more and would be all over the place. And indeed, there is some activity there, of course, but they found that it reduced significantly the activity of the default mode network. And so we were far less likely to engage in those old patterns. And if you think about those old patterns, Scott, those old patterns are the same old negative things you say to yourself. So if you criticize yourself, if you insult yourself, you say, oh my goodness, I'm so stupid. Oh my goodness, I'm such an idiot. Oh my goodness, whatever. As you go through all of that, that's your default way of talking to yourself. When you experience one of these psychedelic journeys, that part of your brain, the inner critic, let's say we sometimes call it, quietens down and shuts up. It's almost like it switches off and it like reboots. Defragments, that is a metaphor they use to describe it. And when people experience it, they're less likely, even after the psychedelic experience, it reduces the likelihood that they will fall into that same old pattern again. And that's why when people go through therapy, they have a transformational experience, especially with things like, people who have done psychedelics, and as a result of it, let's say they have a death sentence. They know that they're going to die because of a disease. They have a totally different way. They're able to make peace with their own death. And we often use the understanding that the reason is, from a spiritual point of view, they realize I'm not an individual. I am part of the universe. And therefore, to some extent, I will always continue to exist as part of the universe, even when my physical body breaks down. Now, spiritually, we understand this. But it sounds a little bit out there. But if you look at it and you really think about what it means there's a shift in terms of the beliefs people have. People who forever have been convinced, I am this person, I am important, it's important to be important, all of these beliefs, there's more flexibility in them. And so once you experience one of those journeys, it's possible for you to have those beliefs relaxed and for you to get to look at the world from a completely different perspective. Like, beforehand, I mean, you mentioned, Scott, in your introduction, and I traveled a lot. So I've traveled to just over 100 countries. I've been to North Korea. I've been to Afghanistan. I've been to Rwanda. I've studied propaganda and beliefs in these places. And whenever I went to a new country, I would try to immerse myself in the culture, learn their history, learn the way in which they were thinking about things so that I could see the world as best as I could through their eyes. And psychedelics allows you to look at the world from a radically different perspective, which gets you less certain of all of these beliefs that you held up. So if I was to say, summarize in a sentence, one of the most powerful things that psychedelics do for our beliefs, it would be psychedelics relax our beliefs and allow us to have a more flexible way of looking at the world.
But Owen, thank you. I had to jump in there for a second. This is a profound statement because think about it. The religious belief systems, not all of them, but many of the religious belief systems, let alone other systems that people believe in that drive their day-to-day lives, are often centered on the idea of adopting and accepting a particular set of, and this word is very loaded, so I'm probably using the wrong one, but a set of orthodoxies. And those orthodoxies, or in many cases, the ongoing ability of those religious belief systems and the organization supporting them to stay structured and alive, requires a lack of flexibility around belief systems. So what I'm hearing is a potential, we're in the middle, as we've discussed before, perhaps on this episode even, and certainly in other episodes, of a psychedelic renaissance. This then could have huge implications for those whose belief systems are within those that require a certain limitation on neuroplasticity.
So interestingly enough, I'm actually going to say that not necessarily.
Well,
and
I'm curious to know why, please.
Yeah. So when if you remember when we were talking at the beginning, one of the things I mentioned is that not only do psychedelics influence or impact our beliefs and relax our beliefs, but our beliefs about psychedelics influence our experience with psychedelics as well. So if you're religious, one of the things that you want to do is you want to protect your beliefs. Yeah. And you want to protect the beliefs that are centered for you. Now, I said earlier, why do we have beliefs that we have? And one of the reasons I gave was because you get a sense of certainty that allows you to make the right decisions so that you can escape when you need to. Well, there's another reason to give. And another reason why we have beliefs is because beliefs allow us to bond with our tribe. They allow us to become connected to the other people. Because when we all believe in the same thing, we become connected with each other. Yeah. And that, again, back in the hunter-gatherer days, that made us more safe. But nowadays, it just makes us feel part of something. I mean, you look at conspiracy theories, and conspiracy theories are flourishing, in a lot of places, largely because people now have a community. They have other people that believe the same thing as they do.
That is true.
And religions have always been based largely on community, right? And science itself is a community. So whether we talk about science or we talk about religion or whatever it is we talk about, what we're talking about is a group of people who are all getting together and agreeing on this is the way things are. Now, you have someone like that goes for a psychedelic experience. You have to ask yourself the question, why are they doing it? Are they doing it because they're lost in life and they want to figure out how things work? Or are they doing it to be able to connect more deeply with their faith? Because if you go into doing, let's say, ayahuasca, and you go in there with a belief that says, this is going to allow me to be able to connect with God and talk to God, then your belief about your experience is very likely to influence how you interpret your experience. Because remember, as you go through ayahuasca, as you experience, let's say, I know I keep using ayahuasca, but it could be mushrooms or it could be LSD or whatnot.
Thank you.
As you go through this journey, it's also relatively ambiguous. Right? When I did ayahuasca, I saw the devil, I saw God, I saw a few celebrities, I saw my family, I saw people that had died in my life, I saw exes, I saw friends. I mean, I had all sorts of different conversations, right? I saw all sorts of crazy things like you would do in a dream, like a lot of stuff. And so how do you interpret that? A shaman will interpret that as a natural state. Like one of the things that I heard from a shaman in Ecuador when I had the experience was they said a lot of people talk about you take one of these things and it makes you hallucinate. But what we believe is that when you take one of these things, it lets you see what really is there, because the real world for them is the spiritual world. So they take the same thing. They have a similar type of crazy, let's say, experience, but they see it as I'm accessing the real world. We
Mm-hmm.
see it as, oh, I'm hallucinating. If you take
Mm.
LSD and you take it with your friends in a dorm room in college, you're going to have a radically different experience than if you take it as part of a therapy with a trained therapist. And you'll have a very different experience as if you take it in some other context, in the middle of a drug den, in the middle of
Right.
some, country which
Yeah.
is very scary to you. So whatever your experience is will be influenced by your expectations and beliefs in that experience. Therefore, a person who has strongly religious beliefs, like equally, someone with strong scientific beliefs might turn around, and actually the research has shown that they're more likely to see that they're more likely to believe that plants have a consciousness as a result
Wow.
of experiencing that. And I too remember the experience, so I'd be open to that possibility as well, because I remember what the journey was like for me. But that doesn't negate my belief in science,
Mm-hmm.
nor do I think it would negate my belief in religion. And I think that it's not a case of religious people who have, let's say, more orthodox beliefs, more rigid beliefs. When they do ayahuasca or they do peyote or they do DMT or whatever,
Yeah.
they open up and become less rigid and they turn their back on religion. I don't necessarily think that would be true. I think they still can fit it into their overall narrative of their life. And I don't think they should either. I think religion serves a wonderful purpose.
Yeah.
Number one, we don't know what the real deal is. So
Yeah.
all religions, any religion could be
Absolutely.
legit. And number
Absolutely.
two, religious beliefs, a lot of them are empowering.
Yeah.
Some of them you could make a big argument that they're not. But there's a lot of beliefs in various different religions that are very empowering and very benevolent and very, they drive things like compassion and love. And so I think what's more important for us to ask is, what is the goal that we have when we use psychedelics? And to me, I'm more interested in how can we use them to overcome the limiting beliefs that are holding us back, not necessarily scientific or religious or any form of belief, but how do we get into the beliefs that we believe we're not good enough, we believe we'll never be enough? How do we tackle those beliefs? How do we tackle the beliefs that we can't trust anyone anymore? How do we overcome the belief that something is terrifying or we won't be able to survive something? Those are the kinds of beliefs I'm interested in challenging.
And that is the sort of set of beliefs that really go as to the long-term, profound, I would even say global impact of what's going on in the world with regards to psychedelics today. Owen, this has been incredible. In a sentence or two, what is one final takeaway, if any, that you'd like to share with the audience? And then after that, how can people find out more about you?
So, Scott, I would suppose the experience, I really do. Like I said, I'm a fan of Webdelics because I think the work that you're doing here is helping educate the world about psychedelics and psychedelic research. And like you said at the beginning, removing the myths that tend to cause us to misunderstand it. What I would get people to realize is, number one, your beliefs about your experience do matter. So go into, if you decide to go down this journey and you decide to get help with any of these psychedelics, make sure that your beliefs are oriented around the most well-educated and also empowering forms of experience. So make sure you've got the right attitude towards it. And then second of all, go in there with an intention to be able to work on yourself, to be able to overcome some of the negative emotions and some of the negative limiting beliefs that hold you back. And when you do that, when you go in with that mentality, a lot of these things can provide you with a radically different experience of the way we see the world. And we are constantly going from state to state to state. And what we need to do is generate the kinds of states where we can be happier, where we can be more loving, where we can be more relaxed, when we can be more confident, and we can start to believe in ourselves more. And so if I'm summarizing everything in a sentence, I think we need to use psychedelics to help us to transform the beliefs inside of us so we can transform the way we see the world.
A poetic way to end the conversation. Owen, where can people find out more about you?
I'm on most of the social media platforms, on Instagram, on LinkedIn. You can just look me up. You should find me easy enough. I'm on Facebook. I've got a YouTube channel. I've got my podcast, Changing Minds, which is a really good way to connect with me. And my website, owenfitzpatrick.com, and changingminds.net as well. So any of those ways, you'll be able to touch base with me.
Owen, I want to thank you so much for being a guest on the show today. This was truly a revelatory conversation. Now, for those of you who are watching or listening in upcoming episodes, we're going to be talking about everything from what exactly shamanism is to the ethics in psychedelics, as well as the intersection of psychedelics and public policy, and so much more. I'm stoked even thinking about it all, and I want you to be too. If you enjoyed today's episode and want to learn more, be sure to subscribe, leave a review or a comment, and tell the folks that you care about what we're doing here. Also, don't forget to follow Webdelics on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. And be sure to check out our website at webdelics.com. That's WEBDELICS.com. Subscribe to our blog for trusted information about psychedelics and plant medicine. And then join us next time for another episode of the Webdelics podcast.